Hi there, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. Howdy. I really want to change the wait music to the remix of Coldplay that uses Snoop Dogg saying "smoke weed every day" as the only lyric. It's so silly and dumb, and every time I listen to it, I laugh. I thought, like most normal human beings, I would listen to it and then grow out of it. The second, third, 100th listen, eventually, you're gonna get cue into, you know, it not being. It's still funny. It's still funny every time, and I cannot tell you why. I have no answer for it other than just it hits a very specific note. It's very dumb, but it's my kind of shit posting, so I appreciate it. It speaks to me. Oh, I already closed the document. I literally just opened that had all of the links, so let me open this shit back up. I'd love to sit here and say that everything is perfect and wonderful this week, but we do at bare minimum have one or two good stories. It's not all bad. It's not oops all bad this week. There's a lot of bad. But at bare minimum, it's not oops all bad this week, which that feels like something. Chugging Monster like it's going out of style. Let's start with a good one. Because I know some of this shit is going to feel terrible regardless. So let's just start off having some fun. Let's start off kind of just with a story to warm the cockles of your heart. Maybe not the cockles, maybe the subcockles. Maybe just something so that I can say the word cockles one more time. Oregon police worry gun permit requirements and magazine limits may include officers. Oops. They forgot to exempt themselves this time. Oregon Measure 114 is one of the few gun control measures that has ever passed in this country where cops are exempted. And the cops are now freaking out. News to warm the subcockles of your heart. Again, anything that will let me say the word cockles, I'm going to just keep going for, because I am a child, and the things that make me laugh will always make me laugh. Oregon police worry gun permit requirements and magazine limits may include officers. Police in Oregon are unsure if they are exempt from the gun control law. Police officers in Oregon don't know if they will be able to purchase new weapons without a permit or carry their service weapons while off duty if the state's embattled gun control law is allowed to take effect. It's not clear how existing certified public safety professionals are treated under this ballot measure, Eugene Police Chief Chris Skinner told Fox News. Both the purchase of weapons and the possessions of magazines in excess of 10 rounds, which all of our duty weapons have that. Yeah, no shit! There were multiple police chiefs that were sponsoring this bill, that were just embracing, it's Fox News, I don't give a fuck for this article at least. At the moment, I'm just fine with it. I know Fox News is the fastest way to uncontrol guns. Yeah, exactly. Their duty weapons, I guarantee you they're running ARs in some jurisdictions. I guarantee you they're running either Glocks or M&P Smith & Wessons, both of which are 15-rounders. Could go to 17 or 21 for, standard capacity, not ridiculous extensions. This is so dumb. Wait, I honestly did not know about that priest. No. God, this is just so fun. Measure 114 requires a permit to purchase any firearm and bans ammunition magazines capable of holding more than 10 rounds, among other changes. It was supposed to take effect last week, but is currently blocked by a judge in eastern Oregon's Harney County. which we didn't get to talk about this last week, so I'm including that as the next story. Apparently, I'm reading Fox a couple times this week. Fuck. I'll find a better story for that. Fuck you, Fox News. The measure does include a carve-out for military members and law enforcement agencies when it comes to the magazine man, but, quote, solely for authorized use by that entity related to the official duties of the entity. That has some agencies confused about whether officers will be allowed to take their service weapons home with them, which, no. No, they will not, motherfuckers. Your service guns now need to go into a goddamn drawer, because this is what you voted for. Your service guns, the only ones that are vaguely exempted from the law, have to be locked up at night, according to this measure. You don't get to take the shit home. You're not exempted. Like, I guarantee you, now that cops are finally, like, grappling with that reality, they're gonna fucking 180 on this measure. Hard. Like, there is no way they are not going to just lean into trying to kill this thing. Every single one of them is going to want to take their duty weapons home. Which honestly kind of doesn't matter, because there's already a judge being like, no, this is not how the Second Amendment works. What the fuck are you talking about? Don't get me wrong. The Second Amendment is a part of it was written by slave owners who didn't wash their dicks. I don't think gun rights come from the Second Amendment. Legal gun rights do. And for all the good and bad, the Second Amendment was intended so I could own fucking warships. Like, our first Navy was privateer. We literally paid people to just be our warships. If the Second Amendment was like the equivalent today, I should be able to go out and buy a fucking, like, Apache helicopter. I should be able to go buy an F-35 if I have the money. Instead, even if you tried to buy a Harrier now, fun fact, you can buy a Harrier-ish, because you can't buy it with the flight technology, which is why nobody fucking buys one. You can buy it and then just, like, store it and have it be a cool thing that's in the corner. I honestly cannot wait for the federal government to be like half the size of what it is right now. It is constant growth is never sustainable, and we have had it for so long that eventually the bubble's gonna fucking burst. And the Supreme Court's already ruled on it. Like, this is a thing that's just gonna get shut the fuck down very quickly. Okay, let's keep reading. Lynn County Sheriff Michelle Duncan told Fox News her department is looking to purchase 10-round magazines for deputies to carry while they are off duty. Oh, you love to hear it. You voted for this nonsense, and now you're, like, desperately trying to figure out how to keep your own safe through the nonsense you foisted on everyone else because you didn't realize it applied to you, too. We don't want them potentially getting a charge in another jurisdiction that could risk their certification and job. I love the fact that they can fucking beat their wives and keep their job, but if you, like, get on paper that you fucked up gun stuff, that is disqualifying. Like, anybody who tells me this country isn't fascist isn't paying attention. I'm sorry. We don't want them to potentially getting a charge in another jurisdiction that can risk their police certification and job. So we'll look at getting them the lower capacity mags for off duty, Duncan wrote in an email. Fuck you, Fox, no. Law enforcement officials said they don't know of a single training program in the state that currently satisfies all of the permit requirements outlined in Measures 114. If and when the law takes effect, they say police may also have to apply for a permit to purchase a gun. Oh, God. I'm just gonna casually put an image up that's totally unrelated to anything. Yeah, what can I say? It is like knowing that they have pushed this shit. assuming that an exemption for them would get carved out, and it just never did. It's so fun to watch. There's no place for them to get the educational requirement. Even the cops can't fucking get it. Congratulations! You played yourselves. It's so bad. It's so many levels of stupid. This is the reason why gun control is always, like, it's always proof that gun control is crafted without the people, like, thinking it through. There are always, like, every single gun control measure that has ever been pushed, if you just looked at them just a little bit, you could see some fucking horrifying shit. And people refuse to listen. Skinner says he hopes to get more clarity on the law in the coming weeks and is holding off on issuing formal guidelines to officers. I want to make sure we have as much information as possible instead of constantly having to amend guidance to officers in the field. He wrote an email on Friday. A hearing is scheduled for Tuesday in the Harney County case. Ooh, so tomorrow we get to find out about whether or not this shit's staying. Which brings up... Let me get a non-Fox. Oregon Live. Sure. This is from 6 days ago. Oregon Measure 114 temporarily blocked statewide by county judge in separate challenge. A Harney County judge Tuesday granted a temporary restraining order against all provisions of Oregon's gun control measure 114. Harney County Circuit Judge Robert S. Rishiro's order came 3 hours after a federal judge allowed the measure to take effect as planned, with a 30-day delay in the provision that required a permit to buy a gun. The Harney County case was brought by Gun Owners of America. Gun Owners of America is an incredibly based group. If you have a few dollars that you want to be throwing towards, like, this fight specifically, go chat up Gun Owners of America and give them a couple of your doubloons. They absolutely have earned it. They fight the good fight consistently. Their lawyers are doing nothing but grinding every single one of these gun control bullshits into the ground wherever they can. And good. Like, not to mention, it's one of the fewer, like, the NRA was great about stuff for white gun owners, but the second there was somebody who was a person of color or somebody who was queer who was being attacked and killed, in particular when it was by the police, they would just be fucking silent. Gun Owners of America is consistently screaming for people's liberty at the top of their lungs, and you gotta appreciate that. Unlike the federal case, their suit in Harney County challenged Measure 114 under Oregon's Constitution, so the federal judge's ruling has no bearing on Rishiro's order. His order is separate and binding. Steve Cantor, Dean Emeritus at Lewis and Clark Law School. While there has been relentless news about mass shootings and slaughter of innocents, Rishiro said, the Gun Owners of America has shown that putting Measure 114 on hold will maintain the status quo until the court can determine in a more in-depth hearing for a preliminary injunction whether the measure meets constitutional muster under Article 1, Section 27 of the Oregon Constitution. That article says, quote, the people shall have the right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state, but the military shall be kept in strict subordination to the civil power. Yeah, I mean, even before we move on, there is no interpretation of that would allow for everybody in the state, except for those acting on behalf of the state, have to get special permission to own guns. But anybody acting on permission of the state has permission to own, not only own firearms, but has an exemption for the use of large capacity magazines. With implementation, there are serious harms to the public interest as well, which could include individuals being arrested and prosecuted for Class A misdemeanors under what could be found to be an unconstitutional statutory scheme. Excuse me. Rishiro ruled from the bench. And that potential could happen if ballot measure 114 is allowed to go into effect without significant judicial scrutiny. And certainly no one would argue that inevitable individual liberty is not a cornerstone of our country. First the people, then the state. Yes, 100%. Yeah, free CBT display shipping. Yeah, I love, like, honestly, I think that if you are a police officer, that should be used as a mark against you for getting a fucking permit. Like, frankly, if you're ever going to like anybody who pushes gun control and doesn't put police the same way that they put civilians, they're fucking lying to you. Because the cops are where a lot of the dangerous people are. They do that on purpose. I think that's something that's worth discussing too. Like the idea that cops are the ones who are supposed to enforce this shit, and they're the ones who you wouldn't like. If it's supposed to be that like you're supposed to get a background check, given the things that many police agencies have done, whole police agencies just would fail the background check. Senator Assistant Attorney General Brian Simmons Marshall urged Rashiro to put a hold to his temporary order, but Rashiro refused. He says his order will bar Measure 114's gun control limit from going into effect as of 12:01 a.m. on Thursday. The measure, which passed by 50.7% of votes, calls for a permit to buy a gun, ban on the sale, transfer, and manufacture of magazines holding more than 10 rounds, and requires a background check to be completed before any sale or transfer of a gun can occur. The Attorney General's office will petition for higher court review of the decision, says Christina Edmondson, a spokesperson for Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum. We are still sorting through every day, but I can tell you we will be shortly filing this petition asking the Oregon Supreme Court to review it immediately, Edmondson said. Rashiro found that guns with more than 10 rounds existed when the Oregon Constitution was drafted in 1857 and when the Constitution was adopted in 1859. He also found that magazines are not separate or distinct from arms, which are protected by the Oregon Constitution. Yeah, fucking exactly. First of all, any gun that has a fixed magazine inherently means, well, I guess it would also be exempted from that, I think, because the point was removable. I honestly don't know how that's phrased. Are guns that have, like, with a Cali-compliant gun that has, like, a 30-round AR mag welded in, would that be illegal in Portland now? God, this is so fucking confusing. Gun laws are dumb. Anybody who thinks these are a good idea usually doesn't have that much familiarity with the guns themselves. They just want them to go away, and they refuse to learn. My single favorite malicious compliance build, there was an option in New York and New Jersey for a while that if you wanted to build an AR, the assault weapons ban banned rifles, and it banned certain features from guns generally being combined together. But you could create. There was this weird category where there was a minimum length or a maximum length for pistols. So if you take an AR with a 16-inch buffer, with a 16-inch barrel and a full buffer tube, or a longer barrel even, and you put on a pistol brace, it's not a rifle because the legal definition of rifle includes stock, and that's not a stock. That's a pistol brace. And then it doesn't count as a pistol because it's too long to meet the definitions of pistol. So they had these, like, what I could only describe as the most cursed builds that were these, like, 18 and 20-inch ARs that were built out with pistol braces. It's just... it's so dumb. Connecticut has some pretty dumb ones. Massachusetts has some pretty dumb ones, and they're just south of us, which has created serious problems. It's also created genuine problems for, like, ComDef shit, because, like, a lot of our options are suddenly, like, literally not legal down there. Like, part of the reason I am maintaining my my shotgun skills is because pumps are legal everywhere there's an assault weapons ban. It's a thing. If your state has an assault weapons ban, literally every pump gun is not in there. Don't get me wrong, they're not always great for every situation, but I also think they are far more robust than a lot of people give them credit for. They're the kind of things, how do I put this? Shooting a shotgun accurately the first few times is more difficult than shooting an AR the first few times. Teaching somebody how to run more complex moving drills is easier with a shotgun. It legitimately is. It's still going to be the same day, but you will see people moving much faster with a shotgun for like actual combat usage. There's certain stuff you can just pick up a lot more quickly if you kind of like get into the rhythm of it. AR stuff, for better and worse, ARs are tactical scalpels. They are great at precision, like all combat rifles are like this. They are great at producing a precise wound where at any distance that you want to if you're controlling it. Shotguns are combat sledgehammers. Like a sledgehammer, most people who just look at it and think all you need is just muscle and grunt are likely to hurt themselves because it requires a little bit of knowledge. But also, if you know how to use one, it can kind of reduce the amount of RAM you need to have for how to think about certain situations. It makes certain kind of monkey brain work, especially when it comes to some CQB stuff. Attorney Tony Aiello, representing the gun owners, had argued that the Giardoni air rifle, which offered a magazine holding 20 shots, was the emerging leader in guns that could fire multiple shots when the Second Amendment was ratified. This firearm is so germane to Oregon's history that Meriwether Lewis himself carried a Girandoni on the Lewis and Clark expedition of the Oregon Territory, Aiello said. Which, yeah, like everybody who's like arguing that these aren't things that have existed for long periods of time, that's straight up just not understanding the history. We have had chain guns and air rifles and a couple other developments that had like 15 and 20 and 25 round capacities for a while. That Girandoni is more than 10 and 20 too. It was a 26 shot rifle, which 25 rounds is like, if you were to round that, that's 30. That's a standard capacity magazine. Like a 26 round mag right now, we would say that's damn close to what we would consider modern magazine sizes. Now, don't get me wrong, they were more fragile. They were also more complicated to load those 26 rounds. Not that much more complicated. Earlier Tuesday, U.S. District Karen Immergert wrote in her ruling in a separate federal case that the Girandoni air rifle was developed for the Austrian army and were, quote, extremely expensive, fragile, and rare, and were pulled from military service in 1815. I mean, yes, but they were also used in woods trucks. And that was also because there were a lot of other rapid-fire weapons that were starting to become available at the time. Aiello called one witness during the hearing, Ben Calloway, owner of a spent cartridge gun shop in Burns. He testified that magazines able to hold more than 10 rounds are standard on many popular guns, and when he tried to order a 10-round magazine for a Glock pistol online, he couldn't find one this week. Marshall of the Attorney General's office had urged the Harney County judge to look at California, which had a similar ban on large-capacity magazines since 1990. Yeah, it's not... California's laws fucking suck. All right, let's move on to the next story. This sneaky DeSantis power grab might be his cruelest yet. Republicans are going after trans people across America, but the potential 2024 contender from Florida is targeting people more efficiently than anyone else. For months now, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has been aggressively using his executive power to deny transgender medical care for two of society's most vulnerable groups, children and the poor. In that, he has been far from alone, as Republicans across the country lean into an ugly backlash against the trans community and the science that supports it. Along the way, DeSantis has been employing a power grab some fear will be adopted by other Republican governors with disastrous results. As a part of DeSantis' ongoing MAGA crusade against progressives, his administration is simultaneously using different state agencies to cut off what is referred to as gender-affirming care that help trans people realize their identities. When a far-right legislator failed to pass an anti-trans bill earlier this year, the government resorted to backyard bureaucracy to get the same result. It's the latest instance of DeSantis implementing increasingly cruel policies as he builds a national reputation in the run-up to a possible 2024 run for the White House. But it also illustrates what political commentators say distinguishes DeSantis from his presumptive primary foe, former President Donald Trump. DeSantis knows how to operate the machinery of government effectively as a weapon against the marginalized, and time is running out for anyone to stop him. We're worried that DeSantis is creating a playbook for political ideology. Legislatures are failing to pass these laws because they are against science and against what constituents and states want to see done with tax dollars. Governors are going to see this and think something they can do to sidestep this is something they can do to sidestep the democratic process, said Carl Charles, a civil rights lawyer with the advocacy group Lambda Legal, which is fighting to block one of these policies. The governor's attack is something of a pincer movement. His administration targeted the poor by eliminating state Medicaid coverage for transgender care in August and is currently preparing to bar doctors from providing related services to minors. They're trying to destroy us. They think that we're less than everybody. They think people don't empathize with us. And unfortunately, he's targeting the youngest people, said Andrea Montanez, a trans woman who began her medical transition when she was a TSA supervisor at Orlando International Airport and now works as a human rights activist. Montanez is worried that the state's refusal to cover some people in the transgender community could embolden insurance companies to do the same. It's scary, she told the Daily Beast. If the state starts with this, private companies will follow their example. Yeah, seriously. There is nobody on the planet who believes that insurance companies will not find ways to cut corners and save a buck. That is just what they fucking do. I don't think there's any argument around that, unfortunately. Insurance companies go out of their way. They will spend as little as possible on people's care they will spend more money than they would on a person's care in order to not have to pay, in order to potentially later be able to not pay somebody else. They will end up going back and paying more for the care than they did for the legal fight. Still think it was worth it for the potential to not have to pay somebody else. The idea that a lot of insurance companies are suddenly getting the signal from states like Florida, hey, we're not going to give a fuck if you just stop offering coverage for trans shit. Everybody who has argued that insurance companies just need to be on a national database has refused to understand the base issue that even when stuff like that has been allowed, no insurance company fucking does it. Every state has their own weird set of rules. And because of that, every state has their own insurance company. Even the major companies, the ones that you know of as oh, that's a national insurance company, they technically have a, thank you for the sub, hon. For the sub. Ignored by Brand. God, 5 months. It's been a while. They will do everything in their power to not spend money. And they are being openly told by multiple places, you can just deny coverage to queer folk for queer care, for incredibly expensive care in many cases. I feel incredibly bad for the trans women who are desperately getting the $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 some of these surgeons charge through social media and goodwill. Let alone what happens if you have one of the more rare intersex conditions. Unfortunately, it kind of just sucks. Florida is now using its healthcare regulators to gaslight the state's transgender population and doctors who specialize in the field by casting doubt on the global scientific community's emerging understanding of gender dysphoria. That condition is described in the Psychiatric Manual of Mental Disorders as the state of being where one feels a deep chasm between the gender they experience and the one they're assigned at birth. Excuse me. Ugh. Official government reports from the DeSantis administration cite disproven or outdated scientific studies, but the fact that this is playing out entirely through the executive branch means that the governor retains power he wouldn't have in the legislature. Tactic makes sense. He would have full control, said Tatiana Williams, a black trans woman who founded the South Florida advocacy nonprofit Trans Inclusive Group. Most of those people he put in place, he said, referring to the agency officials setting DeSantis' plan into motion. They get to move the needle where he wants the needle to go. He would get pushback if he used legislation. People would have their own ideas and do their own research. It saddens me that the mental health of our youth and trans siblings is being impacted by his own political endeavors, she added. Given the increasingly fervent nature of DeSantis' ultra-conservative streak, it's easy to forget that he initially professed libertarian leanings and seems reluctant to waste taxpayer resources on cultural battles. Getting into bathroom wars, I don't think that's a good use of our time, then candidate DeSantis said in May 2018 while debating a fellow Republican at a forum hosted by the Anti-Gay Marriage Florida Family Policy Council. But the cracks started showing early on. During his very first days at the governor's mansion in Tallahassee in 2019, advocacy groups were quick to point out that the newly elected DeSantis left out sexuality and gender identity from the anti-discrimination executive order committing to government diversity. Then, as Republicans nationwide declared war against trans communities in 2021, DeSantis joined the fray by signing a law prohibiting trans girls from playing on sports teams. The most stark measure yet came in the form of a bill sponsored by far-right Florida State Rep. Anthony Sabatini, once hailed by the Orlando Sentinel as the worst person in the legislature. HB 211 sought to actually jail doctors by criminalizing trans care for medical minors, with some exceptions for those, quote, born with a medically verifiable genetic disorder of sexual development. However, the freshman legislator made the boneheaded decision to give a speech vilifying the Republican House Speaker and even DeSantis himself. His proposed bill died in March of this year, but yet behind the scenes, the governor's office picked up the torch and kept advancing that agenda. The crackdown would continue, but through bureaucratic means. In April, the Florida Department of Health, an agency with credibility already severely damaged under DeSantis for recommending against COVID-19 vaccines for kids, entered the fray. It got the ball rolling by issuing an official advisory saying social gender transition should not be a treatment option for children or adolescents. The state's anti-COVID vaccine surgeon followed that up in June by officially asking the state's Board of Medicine to, quote, establish a standard of care for these complex and irreversible procedures. At the same time, Florida's medical industry regulator, the Agency for Healthcare Administration, suddenly floated a new rule that would prevent the state's Medicaid program from covering gender dysphoria treatments across the board. The state would no longer subsidize procedures for anyone of any age, including puberty blockers for minors, hormone therapy, and sex reassignment surgery. To support his position, the AHCA released a report on the same day, one that claimed to assert, quote, generally adapted professional medical standards about gender dysphoria. It's also one that, quote, relies on misrepresentation and discredited information, warned two professors at the University of Miami's medical school, Drs. Sarah Danker and Lydia Fine, a plastic surgeon and obstetrician, respectively. Bracing for the impending crackdown, two of Florida's elected regional prosecutors signed a national joint statement pledging to use their law enforcement discretion to, quote, not promote the criminalization of gender-affirming health care of trans people. One of them, Andrew Warren, got unceremoniously escorted out of his office in Tampa for refusing to enforce the state's new abortion law. But the other, State Attorney Worrell, remains at her post in Orlando because she technically never refused to enforce an existing law. The crackdown on transgender health isn't a criminal matter because the legislation failed. Good evening. It's going as well as it can. We're discussing how the world's on fire. Speaking of ridiculous fire, the pepper spray videos on Patreon. If you want to support me, the stream, and also the cool channels, the cool, weird, ridiculous stuff I make on YouTube, go check out Patreon. It's there for Patreon folks only at the moment. I need to do a redux on that one, though. I've got a bunch more information to talk about. That's yeah. Let's see, what other news stories do we have? Oh, yeah. Texas man charged with threatening doctor who treats trans patients. Prosecutors claim suspect allegedly left voicemail accusing a doctor who treats trans patients of, quote, castrating children. A Texas man faces federal charges in connection with threatening a Boston-based doctor who provides care to members of the trans community. According to a news release from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Massachusetts, 38-year-old Matthew Jordan Lindner of Comfort, Texas, was arrested on December 2nd and charged with one count of transmitting interstate threats. He's scheduled to appear in court via video conference on Wednesday, December 14th, according to court records. According to federal documents, in August of this year, inaccurate information spread online claiming that Boston's Children's Hospital performed hysterectomies and gender confirmation surgery on patients under the age of 18, charges that have since been refuted by the hospital's staff or floated online. Based on that inaccurate information circulating online, Lindner allegedly called the Boston-based Fenway Institute National Queer Health Educational Center on August 31st and left a threatening voicemail targeting one of the center's affiliated doctors. In that voicemail, Lindner allegedly said, "You sick motherfucker, you're all going to burn. There's a group of people on their way to handle the doctor affiliated with the center. You signed your own warrant, lady, castrating our children. You've woken up enough people and upset enough of us. And you signed your own your ticket. Sleep well, you fucking cunt." Police records used to trace the number of the phone leaving the voicemail to Lindner and confirming that the number in question was used to contact the health center for 41 seconds, which is the approximate length of the threatening voicemail. Other phone records confirm that someone used Lindner's number to call a university in Rhode Island, where the doctor who was targeted is a faculty member, and a phone number belonging to the doctor's former medical practice. Massachusetts U.S. Attorney Rachel Rollins said that while the threat targeted a specific doctor, it also victimized queer people and their families. Death threats instill fear in their targeted audiences. The conduct alleged here is not protected free speech. The words used here do not amount to someone simply expressing their discontent or engaging in a heated debate. Mr. Lindner's alleged conduct, a death threat, is based on falsehoods and amounts to an act of workplace violence. Yes, 100%. The victim, a doctor caring for gender nonconforming and transgender patients, should be able to engage in this meaningful and necessary work without fear of physical harm or death. Fear of physical harm or death. And although the doctor is clearly a victim, Mr. Lindner's threat is rooted in hatred of the queer community and the families, friends, and people that love and support them. They are victims too. It's continued. The Department of Justice is pledged to protect the rights of gender nonconforming and trans community, which included the healthcare providers who render care and support, she concluded. This office will vigorously investigate and prosecute individuals who engage in hate crimes, including threats. We will scour the country to ensure the safety and well-being of people in Massachusetts. Hate has no place here. If convicted on the single charge, Lindner could face up to 5 years in prison, up to 3 years of supervised release, and a fine of up to $250,000. Doctors and staff at the Boston Children's Hospital received several violent threats, both via phone and email, over the summer due to misinformation about the medical treatments they prescribe for transgender youth suffering from gender dysphoria. The disinformation was rooted in a video circulated online showing a doctor describing a hysterectomy, but the doctor never said outright or implied that the minors would be able to submit to such a procedure, as Metro Weekly previously reported. Boston Children's Hospital ultimately received 3 separate bomb threats, at least 2 of which were related to the hospital's provision of gender-affirming treatments for trans children. We have covered that story on here before. Yeah. This is all tied into the same shit. The people who are pushing this fake groomer narrative, they're not doing it in a vacuum. They know they're sending these people after us. But they think they have that energy of I don't know if anybody here was ever into the giant pile of problematic stuff that is South Park. But there is an episode where Cartman is supposed to be making fun of Glenn Beck. And he just keeps saying, every time he just keeps saying ridiculous things over and over and asking these like ridiculous questions, leading to ridiculous conclusions, all phrased as questions, so that at the end he can just say, "I'm just asking questions. I'm only asking questions." They're not asking questions. They're the people who are saying this shit know what they're doing. It might be phrased as a question. It's only phrased as a question to lead people to an answer they want to lead them to. It is not actually a question. An actual question would be somebody asking something and looking for an answer. Somebody asking a question can have their mind changed by the information they receive. They can shift how they're thinking and move into something new. You are not going to have the people who are asking these questions ever change their mind, ever shift, ever learn, ever do anything but continue the queer bashing. Because they're not here asking questions. They're not here looking for information. They have their answers. They think saying statements as questions can lead to people coming up with the statement they're making as an answer and feel like they're intelligent because of that. They come up with an answer based on their own personal biases. But because they were able to answer this question, clearly they're intelligent, clearly they're smart, clearly they're seeing it, they're getting it. When in reality, they're just having their biases confirmed.